Well, hello there. I've received a request for a video, or I thought it would be a good idea to show you how to use Excel for the Chapter 4 problems. So, homework isn't due tonight, so I'm not going to do this week's homework. But what I will do is I'm going to show you through a couple sample problems how you can use Excel to calculate the similar problems so that you get a feel for what can be done. And what I've got, these are some problems from a different finance book, but they'll give you a feel for how you can actually solve these problems. So here are a set of similar problems to some of the ones that you have in your homework this week. So these are 5 different projects. They all have a little different properties. So let's go through them and we'll show that. First of all, for net present value, the first one has a series of equal payments at equal times. This is an annuity. So what we can do is we can calculate the present value and compare that against the initial cost. So one of the ways to do that is to go on up here to the function. We'll click on this particular cell. We want to put that number there. We will calculate the present value. Okay, and we'll use the present value very similar to the way that we have in the past. We did last week, so we have 10%. Number of periods is 4. Payment is 4. Put a minus 400 there, and the future value is 0. Gives us a present value of $1,267. We then subtract the $1,000 from that, and we gives us $1,267.95. So it's positive. That would mean we would accept the project, and it would go ahead and be done. So next we come to the internal rate of return. Internal rate of return is a function, and for the values we include the minus 1,000, and I'm just going to highlight those, and we will put that in there, and we will come up with the internal rate of return of 21.86. Much higher than the 10%, it would be accepted. Straightforward. Modified internal rate of return, we find MIRR, modified internal rate of return. We do the same thing with the values for this, but now we need to include the finance rate, and which we say is 10%, and the refinance rate, which is 10%, and we come up with 16.73. Now for payback, we can do the payback, and we will just bring up a simple calculator. And we start out with $1,000, which is the amount, minus what do we do in the first year, which is 400. Leaves us 600 left. Second year, we subtract another 400. Gives us 200, which is less than the 400, so we divide that by the 400, and that's 0.05. So it was 2 years, 2.5 years, and this is a project that we accept. Now the next one we do the net present value. Now, we can't do this as an annuity because, as you notice, the numbers change. So 500, 500, 700, 200. So we'll look at that, and we can build off of that, and we want to use the net present value. Now, when you have numbers that are not consistent or not the same, we can do this, but we can input them one at a time. But we start with the rate, which is 12%. Put in 500, 500, 700, and 200. That gives us the present value of that is 1470. We bring up our calculator. Where did our calculator go? There it is. Calculator. We'll clear everything. So we take 1470 minus 1500, and the net present value is a minus 30. So we are negative, so this project would be rejected. Now let's see what the internal rate of return is. Internal rate of return. And now what we can do for the values is just, again, we'll just put in the values. You can use it by just highlighting those values, and it will give us the internal rate of return. Now, some idiosyncrasies of Excel: when you're calculating the net present value, you do not include the 0 year, so the 1500 was not included, but for the internal rate of return, it is included. Okay? And we do not have to make a guess. So we come up with the internal rate of return is 10.955, which is less than the 12%, so that corresponds with the fact that we do not accept this project. And we'll do the same thing for the modified internal rate of return. We can put in the values, but now we need to put in the finance rate and the internal. So the idiosyncrasies of Excel are sometimes you have to include some things and then other times you don't. This time we have to include the 12% and the 12%, and that will give us a return of 11.44. Again, it is less than the discount rate, so the project will be rejected. The payback period, though, is we'll now do this. We do the calculator. And so we'll do 1500 minus 500 for first year, minus 500 for the second year. And that leaves us with 500, but we have 700 for the third year, which is greater than what's left, so we divide that by 700.71. So we come up with 2.71 years. But it is a reject. Okay, the next one, we can do the same way, net present value. We'll do the net present value. We'll come up with the value for the rate was 15%. 15%. The values that we put in are these. We can highlight it, put that in. We come up with 592.53. So that means quick math gives us a net present value of 92.53, which is positive, so we will accept it. We can do the internal rate of return. Now we put in all of these numbers, and we come up with an internal rate of return of 23%. The modified internal rate of return is done the same way. And we will be using the discount rate of 15%. 15%. And it gives us a 19.99. Now the payback period here is 500 minus 100 minus us 300, 100 divided by 250 equals 0.4. So our payback period is 2.4. And we accept. Okay, the next one, we look for the net present value, and we click here, net present value. We can put in the rate, which is 8%. The value 1 this time, we'll just put them in sequentially. So we'll do 600, 800, 200, and 300. And that will give us a value of 1,600, which is less than the 2,000, so we can calculate that out, which is 1,620 minus the 2,000 gives us a negative 380. So minus 380, which means it will be rejected. Now this one gets to be a little bit interesting. Now when we do the internal rate of return, we come up with the values and we can just highlight them. So we'll just put this in, highlight it, and we come up with an interesting, we get a negative 2%. Now, why is it negative 2%? Well, if you look at it, the initial cost is 2,000. If you add up these four numbers, and you can add in Excel just by highlighting the cells, it'll give you the sum, which is 1,900 right down here, the sum of the rejected cells, is less than the 2,000. We never even get all of our money back. So it comes up with a negative 2%. And the modified internal rate of return, when we do this one, we put in the values and the finance rate of 8% and 8%, we get the same negative 2.4%, 2.7. If we look at it, it's a negative percentage. So it comes up with a 2%, and the payback period, even after it's well, it's actually infinite because we never get the amount back, so we reject. If I could spell, we reject that. Now this last one is an interesting one because you'll notice it has a couple things here. First of all, it has two negatives. It has, we put some money out at the start of the project, we reap some benefits, we have a year where we get nothing, and then at the end we have a negative. So what we have, this is kind of consistent with projects whereby you begin the project, and then at the end of the project you have a cleanup, or you have something that has some part of the project that once you start it you have to spend additional money at the end. So we can calculate the net present value, and we'll do that, and we calculate the present value. We have 10%, and we can put the values in. We'll just highlight them here. And we come up with a 59.2378. So that gives us 923.78. So this is something that we will accept. Now the internal rate of return, we have two negatives, which means that when we do this calculation, there are actually going to be two internal rates of return. So when we go for the internal rate of return, we'll put in the values, which is minus 5,000, comma, 3,000, comma, 8,000, comma, 0. You have to put in the 0 to be able for Excel to calculate that properly. And we put in the 5,000. And you'll see here we get a value which is red. And Excel throws up its hands and says, I can't do that. So it doesn't give you a value. So to get a value, we go to the modified internal rate of return. And we do the same thing. The values, minus 5,000, comma, 3,000, comma, 8,000, comma, 0, minus 5,000. And we put in the 10%, 10%. And we OK that. And it doesn't give us a value. Let's see what we did wrong. Let's rather than putting in the values, let's just go ahead and we'll there we go. We put in the values and it gives us a 12.372. The payback period, which we can come up with, is 5,000 minus 3,000 equals 2,000, and then we divide that by the 8,000, which is 0.25. Payback is 1.25 years, and we accept this one. Okay. That's how we can use Excel to calculate these problems. And hopefully this will be helpful. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to give me a call, send me an email, somehow communicate with me. So good luck with the homework tonight. I will be posting the actual problem solving tomorrow. So take care.